My water broke in the middle of the night. Desperate from the pain, I called my husband, but the only thing I heard were the moans of his mistress. In silence, I recorded everything and sent it to my father-in-law, a high-ranking general. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one ripping through my body. It was 3 a.m. in Arlington, Virginia, and the rain was lashing against the windows of our stately brick home within the secure residential complex of Fort Belvoir. The wind howled like a wounded animal, shaking the frames, but I could barely hear it over the rushing of blood in my own ears. I was Maggie Sterling, 32 years old, 9 months pregnant, and completely alone. The first contraction hit me like a physical blow, an electric shock tearing through my heavy, swollen body. I gasped, gripping the sheets of the empty bed, my knuckles turning white. I gritted my teeth, my forehead beating with cold sweat. It was too soon. I wasn't due for another 2 weeks. But nature does not care about schedules or due dates. The second contraction came much sooner than I expected, rolling over me like a tidal wave. I pushed myself up to the edge of the bed, trying to stand, trying to breathe through the agony, and then it happened. A torrent of warm liquid gushed down my thighs, soaking my nightgown and pooling on the expensive hardwood floor. My water had broken. Panic rose in my throat, tasting like bile. I was terrified. My hand, trembling violently, reached for the phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up in the darkness, blinding me for a second. The wallpaper was our wedding photo. There was Rick Sterling, my husband, handsome and extraordinary in his lieutenant colonel dress uniform. And there I was, in an immaculate white wedding gown, smiling sweetly, naive to the future that awaited me. Earlier that night, Rick had kissed my forehead, his eyes shifting away from mine as he told me he had an unscheduled emergency drill on the base. He said the Joint Special Operations Command had critical training exercises that couldn't wait. I believed him. I always believed him. He was a Sterling, after all. Duty came first. I dialed his number. My fingers were slippery with sweat, and I nearly dropped the phone. I needed him. I needed his strength, his voice, his reassurance. I needed my husband to tell me that everything was going to be okay, that he was coming to get me and our son. The phone connected quickly. I opened my mouth to scream his name, to tell him the baby was coming, but the words died in my throat. On the other end of the line, there was no solemn sound of training grounds. There was no whistle of the wind at the barracks, no shouting of orders, no marching boots. What I heard was heavy, lascivious panting. I froze. My entire body paralyzed, and for a terrifying second, even the pain of the contraction seemed to stop, suspended in time by pure shock. I pressed the phone harder against my ear, praying I was hallucinating, praying it was some sort of interference. But then came the sound that shattered my world. It was the suggestive, broken moan of a woman in the throes of ecstasy. It was a high-pitched, needy sound that made my stomach turn. Then, I heard my husband's voice. The familiar baritone I heard every morning over coffee, the voice that had vowed to love and cherish me. But now, it was hoarse with desire, unrecognizable and yet undeniably him. Rick's voice echoed in a seductive whisper, clear as a bell through the receiver. "Tiffany, you little devil. Don't move like that." Tiffany. A name I didn't know. A name that stabbed into my heart like a dagger. He wasn't at a drill. He wasn't serving his country. He was in bed with a woman named Tiffany, betraying me while I was alone, terrified, and bringing his child into the world. I didn't hang up. A strange, icy calm washed over me, displacing the panic. It was the cold clarity of survival. The physical pain returned with brutal force, doubling me over, but my mind was operating on a different level. I stared at the phone screen, the call timer ticking up. One idea crossed my mind. My hand, though shaking from the pain, moved with precision across the screen. I activated the call recording feature. In my ears, the symphony of betrayal continued. The moans of the woman named Tiffany grew sharper, mixed with gasps and the wet, sickening sound of flesh against flesh. I listened. I forced myself to listen to every second of it. Almost a minute passed. A minute that felt like a century, torturing my eardrums and shattering my soul. I bit my lower lip so hard I tasted the metallic tang of blood in my mouth. Suddenly, the call was disconnected from the other end. He was finished. I took a deep, ragged breath. The sharp pain in my womb was nothing compared to the emotional pain that was suffocating me. Calmly, I looked at the audio file that had just been automatically saved. I didn't call Rick again. He didn't deserve to know. He didn't deserve to be here. I opened my contacts and called the Sterling family's driver. My voice was dry, but terrifyingly steady. "Joe, my water broke. Come get me now. Take me to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center." I hung up without giving the driver a chance to ask questions. Then, I opened my messaging app. I scrolled past Rick's name. I scrolled past his mother, Constance. I stopped at a name saved with the utmost solemnity, Dad. It was 4-star General Arthur Sterling, the commander of Fort Belvoir, my father-in-law. The patriarch. The man who valued honor above all else. My finger hovered over the send button. This was the nuclear option. This would destroy everything. But then I looked down at my swollen belly, at the child who was fighting to be born into this mess. I decisively pressed on the newly saved audio file and sent it. After the file sent successfully, I typed a short message, each word clear and concise. "Dad, my water broke. I'm on my way to Walter Reed. Rick is busy. Send." I tossed the phone aside onto the bed. I braced myself for the next contraction, feeling as if my back was about to split in two. I screamed into the empty, cold house. That night, either my child and I would die, or the Sterling legacy would burn to the ground. The black government sedan sped through the torrential rain, hydroplaning slightly on the slick asphalt. The D.C. area at night was engulfed in the storm, a chaotic mirror of my own life. I sat in the back seat, gripping the leather armrests so tightly my fingernails threatened to tear the material. Joe, the driver, kept glancing at me through the rearview mirror, his eyes wide with concern, but I couldn't speak. I just breathed, counting the seconds between the waves of agony tearing through my midsection. As the city lights blurred into streaks of neon against the rain-streaked window, my mind drifted. Pain has a way of unlocking doors in your memory you thought were sealed shut. I wasn't just driving away from my home, I was driving away from the illusion I had lived in for 3 years. I remembered the day I married Richard Sterling. It was a crisp autumn day in Boston. I was Maggie then, just Maggie, a doctoral candidate in psychology with a bright future and a thesis to finish. But on that day, I became Mrs. Richard Sterling, a piece of the Sterling puzzle. Our union had been an arrangement of sorts, though I hadn't wanted to see it that way. My father was a renowned history professor at Harvard, an intellectual giant but not a man of wealth or power. The Sterlings were American royalty, a military dynasty from Virginia with 3 generations of generals. It was viewed as the perfect merger, old money prestige meeting Ivy League intellect. I remembered standing at the altar, looking at Rick. He was dazzling. The youngest lieutenant colonel in his unit, the pride of the command. He had that Sterling jawline, the confident posture, the way he looked at me as if I were a prize he had won. In the beginning, he treated me well. It wasn't a passionate, movie star romance, but there was respect. He opened doors, he bought me flowers, he gave me a sense of security I had never known. But then there was his mother, Constance Sterling. I closed my eyes as the car hit a pothole, a fresh contraction seizing my uterus. Through the pain, Constance's voice echoed in my head. You have a duty now, Margaret, she had told me on my wedding day, her hand gripping my arm a little too tightly, her smile not quite reaching her cold, assessing eyes. Rick is destined for the Pentagon. He needs a wife who supports him, not one who is buried in books and research. The Sterling bloodline must continue. We need a grandson, and we need Rick to be focused. It was a command, not a suggestion. And like a fool, I had listened. I put my career on hold. I stopped my research. I moved to Virginia and became the perfect officer's wife. I hosted the dinners, I smiled at the galas, I navigated the shark-infested waters of the military wives' social circles. I made myself small so Rick could feel big. And for a while, I thought it was working. Until 6 months ago. Everything began to change so subtly I almost missed it. The emergency drills started happening more frequently. The secret work trips became longer. He remained kind, in fact, he became even more attentive in strange ways. He started insisting on preparing my herbal pregnancy teas personally, claiming he wanted to take care of me. I thought it was sweet. I thought he was trying to bond with the baby. Now, sitting in the back of this car, clutching my belly, I laughed. A dry, rasping sound that frightened Joe in the front seat. "Ma'am? Are you okay?" Joe asked, his voice trembling. "Just drive, Joe," I whispered. "Just drive." With a woman's sensitivity, I had realized the emotional distance growing between us months ago. I felt it in the way he pulled away when I tried to hug him, the way he took his phone into the bathroom, the way his eyes glazed over when I talked about the nursery. But I had no proof. And truthfully, I didn't want to believe it. I was pregnant. I was vulnerable. I needed him to be the man I thought he was. The child in my womb was the last thread that kept me tied to him. I thought a son, the grandson Constance demanded, would fix us. I thought holding his baby would bring the light back into Rick's eyes. But tonight, Richard Sterling himself had severed that thread with his own hands. Or rather, with his own lust. "Tiffany," I whispered the name into the darkness of the car. It sounded cheap. It sounded like a betrayal. I looked down at my phone. It was silent. No calls from Rick. He was probably still asleep in her arms, exhausted from his drill. The realization made bile rise in my throat again. He didn't even know his son was fighting for his life right now. He didn't care. The car screeched to a halt at the entrance of the Walter Reed emergency room. The bright fluorescent lights of the hospital bay assaulted my eyes, bringing me back to the cruel reality. I wasn't Maggie the scholar anymore. I wasn't even Mrs. Sterling, the respected wife. I was just a woman alone, bleeding and broken, about to face the hardest battle of my life. Joe rushed out to open my door. Nurses and doctors were already waiting with a gurney, their faces masks of professional urgency. As they lifted me onto the stretcher, I looked up at the stormy sky one last time. The old Maggie died in that car. Whatever walked out of this hospital, if I walked out at all, would be someone entirely different. The world dissolved into a chaos of white lights, beeping monitors, and shouting voices. The pain was no longer coming in waves, it was a constant, screaming presence in my lower body. As soon as they placed me on the gurney, a senior female doctor with graying hair and a no-nonsense expression looked grimly at the monitors. "The situation is critical," she barked to the team surrounding me. "The patient is showing signs of severe distress. BP is dropping rapidly. Fetal heart rate is unstable and decelerating. We have fetal distress. We need to prep her for an emergency C-section immediately." Words like fetal distress and decelerating floated above me, terrifying and abstract. I tried to lift my head, to ask about my baby, but my body felt incredibly heavy, like lead. "Where is the family member? Who signs the consent form?" the doctor shouted, looking around the hallway. Joe, the driver, stood near the entrance, looking flustered and out of place in his suit. He stammered, twisting his cap in his hands. Ma'am, the lieutenant colonel, he's not here. The doctor's eyes narrowed. Not here? This woman is crashing. We don't have time to wait for a husband to show up. I let out a ragged breath, fighting the black spots dancing in my vision. I felt cold, so incredibly cold. It felt like the life was draining out of me along with the fluids on the sheets. I extended a trembling hand, grabbing the doctor's scrub top. I'll sign, I gasped out. The doctor was surprised for a second, looking down at me with a mixture of pity and respect. She quickly handed a clipboard and a pen to a nurse, who held it in front of my face. I looked at the words blurring before me: consent for surgical intervention. Cesarean section. Risks include hemorrhage, infection, death. Alone. I was doing this alone. I gripped the pen with slippery fingers. I signed my name. Margaret Sterling. The signature was shaky, barely legible, but it was legal. Just as I let go of the pen, the emergency room doors burst open again. A gust of cold, storm-swept air and an imposing presence filled the sterile room. It wasn't Rick. General Arthur Sterling stood in the doorway. He was still in his full four-star general's uniform, having likely come straight from a command meeting, or perhaps he had been awake, waiting. His stars gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. His face, nearing 60, was sharp and severe like a statue carved from granite. But now, that statue face held a suppressed storm that was far more terrifying than the weather outside. Behind him, his aide and two uniformed MPs stood firm at the door. The air in the room changed instantly. The chaos seemed to pause. All the doctors and nurses, realizing who had just walked in, held their breath. A few instinctively straightened their posture. This was the commander of Fort Belvoir. This was a man who moved armies. General Sterling ignored everyone. His gaze cut through the crowd like a laser and locked onto me, his daughter-in-law, lying helpless on the gurney. He walked over to me, his heavy boots clicking rhythmically on the linoleum floor. He saw my pale face, my lips bitten raw and bleeding, and the signature I had just made on the clipboard. He looked at the empty space beside me where his son should have been. He leaned down, his voice low and rumbling, trying to contain a monumental rage that I could feel radiating off him like heat. "Maggie," he said, using the nickname he rarely used. "Stay calm. Dad is here." I looked at him. The strength I had tried to maintain from home until that moment seemed about to crumble. Tears finally welled up in my eyes, hot and stinging. I couldn't speak. I couldn't tell him about the audio file again. I just nodded slightly. The head of the surgical team gave a signal. "We're moving. Go, go, go." The gurney was pushed away, picking up speed. The green doors of the operating room swung open. As I was wheeled past the general, I saw his hand resting on the hilt of his ceremonial sword, his knuckles white. The doors swung shut, separating me from the outside world. Inside the OR, the smell of disinfectant was overpowering. They moved me onto the operating table. The anesthesiologist was saying something about spinal block and hurry, but I was fading. "Doctor," a nurse shouted. "She's bleeding heavily. Her clotting factors are off. Look at the blood. Get more units of O negative. Stat." The fear hit me then. Not the fear of pain, but the fear of never seeing the face of the child I had carried for 9 months. "Rick," I thought, a bitter, final thought. "You aren't even here to see me die." The hallway outside the operating room was oppressively silent. The white fluorescent light reflected off General Arthur Sterling's medals, making his face look even more stoic, more terrifying. The air around him was so dense that even the two MPs standing a few feet away held their breath, their backs straight as boards, eyes fixed on the wall. They knew better than to move a muscle. Arthur remained motionless, standing like a sentinel, but inside, a volcano was erupting. He pulled his military-issued smartphone from his pocket. His finger hovered over the audio file Maggie had sent him. He had listened to it in the car on the way over. He listened to it again now, holding the phone up to his ear. The lascivious gasps. The woman's shameless moans. His own son's voice, hoarse with desire. "Tiffany, you little devil." Every sound was like a needle piercing the pride and honor he had defended his entire life. The rage caused his shoulders, normally steady as mountains, to tremble uncontrollably. This was not just infidelity. This was a humiliation to the sterling name. It was a grave breach of military discipline, abandoning his post and his family during an emergency. And worst of all, it was happening while Maggie, the woman Arthur had come to respect more than his own son, was fighting for her life. At that moment, hurried, panting footsteps echoed down the end of the hall. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Sterling came running around the corner. He looked a mess. He was still in his uniform, but it was disheveled. The top button of his tunic was undone. His hair was messy, not the regulation cut Arthur insisted on. And there, on his neck, visible under the harsh hospital lights, was a faint, reddish smudge. Lipstick. A brand of shame. Rick was breathing heavily, his face pale, trying to mask his panic with a facade of concern. He spotted his father and slowed down, composing himself. "Dad! You're here," Rick panted, rushing forward. "How's Maggie? Is she okay?" "I just finished the urgent combat briefing and rushed over as soon as I got the message from Joe." He stopped in front of his father, putting on his best worried husband face. "God, I ran all the way from the command center." "What's happening?" The silence that followed was deafening. The doctors and nurses passing by stopped. The MPs stiffened. Arthur looked at his son. He looked at the lipstick stain. He looked at the unbuttoned tunic. He looked at the lies spilling out of Rick's mouth. Smack. A sharp, resounding crack echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. Arthur Sterling's open hand struck his son's cheek with the full force of a 4-star general. It was so hard that Rick's head snapped violently to the side. He stumbled back, losing his balance, and nearly fell. A trickle of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth instantly. The entire corridor froze. The MPs turned their heads slightly to face the white wall, pretending they were statues, but their hands clenched behind their backs betrayed their shock. A general striking a lieutenant colonel, striking his own son, in public. Rick held his cheek, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. "Dad? What are you doing?" Arthur roared. His normally composed, commanding voice was now raw with fury, each word a knife. "Urgent briefing?" Arthur stepped forward, looming over his son. "You had your briefing in some woman's bed, you disgrace." "Dad, I don't know what you're talking about, I was at JSOC." Rick stammered, trying to maintain the lie. Arthur didn't give him a chance to finish. He held up his phone. He didn't keep it to his ear this time. He pressed the speaker button and turned the volume to the maximum. "Listen to your briefing, Colonel," Arthur snarled. The audio file played. Right there in the hospital corridor that should only smell of disinfectant and silence, the obscene, raw sound of a sexual encounter echoed stridently. Moan. Gasp. "Tiffany, oh God." Slap of flesh. The sounds bounced off the tiled walls. Nurses covered their mouths. A passing doctor stopped dead in his tracks. Rick's face went from pale to paper white, then to an ashen gray. The color drained out of him so fast he looked like a corpse. He stared at the phone in his father's hand as if it were a poisonous snake. The lie he had just told had become a humiliating farce. He looked up at his father and saw in Arthur's eyes not just anger, but absolute disappointment and contempt. It was the look a man gives to something he scraped off his boot. "Dad. I can explain, it's not." Rick's voice was a pathetic whimper. "Explain?" Arthur threw his own phone at his son's chest. Rick fumbled to catch it, dropping it on the floor. You left your wife alone while she was bleeding out to roll around with a whore. You lied to a superior officer. You stained this uniform. Rick's knees buckled. The weight of the exposure was too much. He collapsed onto the cold tile floor, kneeling amidst the sounds of his own infidelity still playing from the phone on the ground. Just then, click. The red light above the operating room door went off. The green doors swung open. A veteran-looking doctor, the chief of surgery, came out wearily, pulling down his mask. His surgical gown was splattered with an alarming amount of red blood. He was slightly taken aback by the scene in the hallway, the kneeling officer, the furious general, but he quickly regained his professional composure. He approached General Sterling and bowed his head respectfully. "General," the doctor said, his voice grave. "The operation was complicated. But it was a success. We managed to deliver the baby. It's a boy. 7 pounds, 1 ounce. Arthur nodded slightly. The anger in his face was momentarily contained, replaced by a rare flicker of relief. He asked, his voice still hoarse from shouting. "And my daughter-in-law?" The doctor sighed, rubbing his temples. The patient lost a significant amount of blood. Her clotting factors were inexplicably low. We nearly lost her twice on the table. She suffered severe physiological shock. She is very, very weak. She will need to be in intensive observation for the next 24 hours. The family should be prepared for anything. The doctor's last sentence was like a bucket of cold water on the budding relief. Arthur clenched his fists until his leather gloves creaked. His gaze, cold as ice, swept over his son kneeling on the floor once more. Rick looked up, terror in his eyes as he heard the doctor's words. Arthur leaned down, whispering a venomous promise. "If she dies, Richard, I will personally see to it that you face a firing squad. This is all your fault." I awoke in a quiet VIP room. The transition from the darkness of anesthesia to the waking world wasn't gentle, it was like being pulled underwater. My body felt like it had been run over by a tank. The incision across my lower abdomen burned with a sharp, hot fire, but that pain was distant, secondary. The smell of disinfectant was faint here, masked by the scent of fresh lilies in a vase by the window. The weak light of dawn filtered through the blinds, casting striped shadows across the room. I turned my head slowly. It felt heavy, like a stone. Next to the bed was a small bassinet. Inside, a tiny creature with still wrinkled reddish skin slept soundly. My son. I looked at him, but my gaze was empty. I waited for that rush of overflowing joy, the maternal instinct that everyone talks about in magazines. But I felt hollow. The trauma of the night had scooped me out. I loved him, I knew I did, but there was a layer of ice protecting my heart. He was safe. That was all that mattered. Click. The door opened softly. My heart rate monitor spiked. I knew who it was before I saw him. Richard Sterling entered the room. He had changed out of his uniform into clean civilian clothes, a polo shirt and slacks, but he couldn't hide the disarray of his spirit. The dark circles under his eyes were profound. The mark from his father's hand was still vividly purple on his cheek, swelling slightly. He approached the bed cautiously, like a dog that knows it has been bad. He looked at me with a complex expression, guilt, relief, and something that looked like fear. "Maggie," he whispered. "You're awake. Thank God." He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. He reached out to take my hand, which was resting on the white blanket. "Maggie, honey, let me explain. Things are not what you think. Dad misunderstood. It was a misunderstanding. I shifted slightly. It took every ounce of strength I had. I withdrew my hand with a gentle but firm gesture, leaving his hand suspended in the air. The silence in the room was absolute. My gaze moved slowly from the baby to his face. I didn't blink. I didn't cry. My eyes were dry, arid deserts. I looked at him not as my husband, not as the father of my child, but as a stranger. A dangerous stranger. "Lieutenant Colonel Sterling," I said. My voice was weak, raspy from the intubation tube, but each word was clear and frigid. Rick flinched. I had never called him by his rank in private. Never. "You should take a shower first," I continued, my voice devoid of any emotion. Rick looked confused. "What?" "Maggie, The smell of that woman's perfume on you is too strong," I said, cutting him off. "It smells cheap. Like vanilla and desperation. Our son is just a newborn, Colonel. His respiratory system is delicate. He can't be around foreign fragrances." Rick was speechless. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. The denial died on his lips. He realized, horrified, the change in me. He expected tears. He expected screaming. He expected Maggie the doormat to ask why. But I didn't scream. I didn't question him. I didn't insult him. There was only an absolute coldness, a coldness more terrifying than any storm. It meant my heart was dead to him. "Maggie, please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I love you. We can fix this." "There is no we, Rick," I said, turning my head to look out the window. "I want a divorce. And I want you to leave this room before I call the nurse to have you removed." At that moment, the door opened again. General Arthur Sterling entered, followed by his aide. The general had changed out of his uniform into a suit, but his imposing aura had not diminished. He looked at his son with eyes as sharp as knives. He didn't even acknowledge Rick's presence as a person, but rather as a problem to be solved. "Return to the base immediately," Arthur commanded. His voice wasn't loud, but it was non-negotiable. Rick stood up, trembling. "Dad, I want to stay with my wife." "You have no wife here," Arthur said coldly. "Write a detailed report on your conduct last night. From now until further notice, you are under full arrest in your quarters. You are not to take a single step outside. Hand over your personal phone. Now." Rick dared not argue. He knew he was lucky not to be in a cell already. He bowed his head, silently took his phone from his pocket, the one he had used to call her, and handed it to his father's aide. He looked at me one last time with helplessness. "Maggie." I didn't look back. He left the room, his head hung low, the door closing with a soft click. Only Arthur and I remained. The general approached the bed. His face softened, the lines of stress visible around his eyes. "Rest, daughter," he said gently. "Don't think too much. I assure you, I will give you a satisfactory resolution to all of this. The Sterling name will not protect him from what he did to you." I looked at him. "Thank you, Dad." But deep down, as I closed my eyes, I knew a satisfactory resolution wasn't enough. I didn't just want an apology. I didn't just want a divorce. Something in the way my body felt, the deep, unnatural weakness, the bleeding the doctor mentioned, told me this wasn't over. The hospital days were a blur of nurses, pain medication, and the rhythmic sucking sound of a breast pump. But while my body lay in the white bed, my mind was traveling back in time. I had too much time to think, and the doctor's words about my low clotting factors and unexplained weakness kept playing in my head on a loop. Unexplained. I had always been healthy. My blood work had been perfect for the first 2 trimesters. So what changed? My mind drifted back to 6 months ago. The beginning of the change. It started around the same time Rick began his drills. He came home one evening, carrying a fancy paper bag with gold lettering. He had a smile on his face, a smile I now recognized as the mask of a liar, but back then, I thought it was love. "Maggie, I've been thinking," he had said, kissing my cheek. You look tired lately. I asked around, and the chief medical officer's wife recommended the specialist herbalist in DC. She makes these custom pregnancy teas. Supposed to be amazing for the baby's development and the mother's strength. I remembered feeling so touched. Rick, who barely knew the difference between Tylenol and Advil, went out of his way to get me custom tea. You're so sweet, I had said, hugging him. From that day on, Rick became obsessed with the tea. Every evening, no matter how busy he was, no matter if he was tired, he would personally go to the kitchen. I could hear the clinking of the ceramic mug, the sound of boiling water. He would bring it to me on the sofa, steaming hot. The smell was distinct, earthy, slightly pungent, with a bitter undercurrent that he masked with a spoonful of honey. Drink it all up, honey, he would say, sitting next to me, watching. That was the strange part. He watched me. He wouldn't look at the TV, or his phone. He would watch me sip the dark liquid until the cup was empty. At the time, I thought it was protective. He wanted to make sure I was taking my medicine. It tastes a bit strong today, I remarked once, about 3 months ago. That means it's working, Rick had replied smoothly, taking the empty cup from my hand. It's concentrated nutrients. I remembered how I felt after drinking it. Within 30 minutes, a wave of lethargy would wash over me. My limbs would feel heavy, my eyelids drooping. I would sleep deeply, but it wasn't a restful sleep. It was a heavy, drugged coma. And the next mornings. God, the mornings. I would wake up feeling like I had been beaten. My gums would bleed when I brushed my teeth, just a little, but noticeable. I had bruised easily, too. I remembered bumping my hip against the coffee table and developing a massive, dark purple bruise that took weeks to fade. I had mentioned it to Dr. Evans, our OBGYN. But Dr. Evans was Rick's golfing buddy. He was part of the Sterling Circle. It's just pregnancy anemia, Maggie, Dr. Evans had dismissed it with a wave of his hand. Your body is working hard. The bruising is normal. The fatigue is normal. Keep drinking plenty of fluids. Did Dr. Evans know? Or was he just incompetent? Lying in the hospital bed, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I closed my eyes and pictured the last few weeks. The tea had become darker. The taste more bitter. And I had become weaker, to the point where lifting a laundry basket made me dizzy. Safflower. The word popped into my head from a memory of a toxicology paper I had proofread for a friend years ago during my master's. Some herbs were natural, yes, but natural didn't mean safe. Some herbs were abortifacients. Some herbs thinned the blood. Rick wasn't just cheating on me. The realization hit me so hard my heart monitor beeped rapidly, bringing a nurse running into the room. Mrs. Sterling? Are you okay? Your heart rate is spiking. I looked at the nurse, my eyes wide with a horror that she couldn't possibly understand. I'm fine. Just a bad dream. It wasn't a dream. It was a puzzle falling into place. The emergency drill lie. The infidelity. The tea. The watching. He wasn't just trying to hide an affair. He was trying to get rid of the problem. He was trying to get rid of the pregnancy. Or maybe, get rid of me. If I had died on that table from a hemorrhage, who would have questioned it? A tragic complication of childbirth. The grieving widower would have buried his wife and son, cried at the funeral, and then, been free. Free to be with Tiffany. Free with his inheritance. I looked at the bassinet where AJ was sleeping. My hands clenched into fists under the sheets. I wasn't just a victim of adultery. I was a survivor of an assassination attempt. I needed proof. I couldn't tell the general yet, he would need hard evidence to believe his son was a murderer. I needed to get back to that house. I needed to get to the kitchen. I needed to find what was in that trash can. While I was plotting my investigation in the silence of the hospital room, a different kind of war was being waged outside. Tiffany Banks wasn't the type of woman to hide in shame. She was the type of woman who, when cornered, attacked. She had been suspended from her job at her father's construction company, Vance Construction, though it was merely a formality. She was sitting in her luxury apartment in downtown DC, the one Rick had secretly helped pay for, fuming. She knew Rick was under house arrest. She couldn't contact him. The silence was driving her mad. She knew the general was involved now. Most mistresses would pack their bags and run. But Tiffany was delusional with ambition. She didn't just want Rick, she wanted the sterling name. She wanted the status. She believed, in her twisted mind, that she was the better option for Rick. Maggie was boring, academic, stiff. Tiffany was exciting, young, willing to do anything. She decided to launch a counteroffensive. If she couldn't reach Rick, she would reach his mother. I learned about this later, but the damage was immediate. Tiffany opened her private Instagram account. It was set to private, but she had carefully curated her followers. Among them was the wife of a major who was the biggest gossip in the DC military circuit, and crucially, a friend of Constance Sterling. Tiffany selected a photo. It wasn't explicit, but it was devastating. It was an artistic shot taken a week ago. It showed a man's hand, unmistakable with the Sterling-class ring on the finger, resting on a woman's bare thigh in tangled sheets. The caption read, "True love fights through the storms. Waiting for you, my hero. #soulmates #fate. She posted it. Within hours, the screenshot had circulated through the military wives group chats like a virus. It didn't take long to reach Constance Sterling. In the Sterling mansion, Constance was already pacing the floors, furious about the mess Rick had made. When her friend sent her the screenshot, Constance didn't get angry at her son. She didn't get angry at the mistress for ruining a marriage. Her twisted logic went straight to self-preservation. "This is getting out of hand," Constance reportedly said to her maid. "If this becomes a public scandal, Arthur's reputation is ruined. Rick's career is over. We need to control the narrative." And in Constance's mind, controlling the narrative meant silencing the victim. Back in the hospital, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize, but the tone was unmistakable. "You think you've won because you have the baby? He doesn't love you. He stays out of duty. Look at us. This is passion. Let him go." Attached was the photo. I stared at the image. The ring on the finger. The ring I had placed there. I didn't feel jealousy. I felt nausea. But more than that, I felt a surge of adrenaline. Tiffany Banks was arrogant. She was sloppy. She was leaving a digital trail. She wanted a fight? She was going to get a war. But not the catfight she expected over a man. I was fighting for my life. I screenshotted the message. I saved the image. Evidence. It was all evidence. 5 days later, I was discharged. The exit from the hospital was a military operation in itself. General Sterling had arranged for security to keep the press away. Rumors of the Sterling scandal were starting to leak. But I refused to go back to the Sterling mansion in Fort Belvoir. "Take us to the Vista Bella apartments on K Street," I told Joe, the driver. Joe hesitated, looking at me in the rearview mirror. "Ma'am? The general expects you at the main house." "The general knows I am not going back to that house, Joe," I said firmly, clutching AJ in his carrier. Drive. I had rented the apartment online from my hospital bed, using the inheritance money from my grandmother that I had kept in a separate account, the only money Rick couldn't touch. It was expensive, fully furnished, and most importantly, it was mine. When we arrived, it felt like landing on a different planet. The apartment was modern, cold, and quiet. It didn't smell like old wood and sterling history. It smelled of potential. But peace is a luxury I wasn't afforded for long. The next morning, the doorbell rang. I checked the camera. It was Constance Sterling. She was dressed in Chanel, her hair perfectly coiffed, carrying a designer bag that probably cost more than my car. I took a deep breath. I knew this moment would come. I opened the door but didn't step aside. "Constance," I said. "Not Mother. Not Mrs. Sterling. Just Constance." Her eyes narrowed at the lack of title. "Margaret. May I come in? We need to discuss the situation." "You can say what you need to say from the hallway," I replied, blocking the entrance. Constance's fake smile faltered. "Don't be childish. I'm here to help you. Look, I know you and Rick had a little misunderstanding. I know Rick made a mistake. Men do that. They have needs. They have stress. He failed you, yes. But look at the bigger picture." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You are a sterling wife. You hold the family together. You have to be a little more understanding. Arthur is furious, but he'll calm down. You need to come home. We settle this behind closed doors. You forgive him, he apologizes, and we move on. AJ needs a father." I listened to her, marveling at the audacity. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, she was demanding compliance. She wanted me to swallow the humiliation to save face for her son. "And if I don't?" I asked quietly. Constance's face hardened. The mask dropped completely. "Don't be stupid, Margaret. You are an unemployed academic with no income. If you divorce him, we have the best lawyers in the country. We will crush you. I will make sure you end up with nothing. And custody? Do you really think a judge will give a sterling heir to a woman living in a rental apartment? We will take that boy." There it was. The threat. I looked at this woman, this matriarch who had made my life a misery of passive-aggressive comments and controlling demands for 3 years. I thought about the tea. I thought about Rick. I thought about the sterling bloodline she was so obsessed with. I smiled. It was a cold, dangerous smile that made Constance step back. "Constance," I said, my voice steady. "My indulgence ran out the night I gave birth alone while your son was with his whore." I leaned in closer. "And as for custody, you should be very careful about threatening me. Because I know things. And if you push me, I won't just divorce your son. I will bury him." Constance looked shocked. She had never seen this side of me. She opened her mouth to speak, but I slammed the door in her face. I leaned against the wood, my heart pounding. I had declared war. Now I had to win it. And to win it, I needed to go back to the scene of the crime. I needed to get that tea. I knew I couldn't hide in the apartment forever. Isolation creates fear, and I was done being afraid. 2 days after Constance's threatening visit, I decided to reclaim my space. I took AJ down to the lobby of the Vista Bella complex. It was a crisp morning, the kind that usually clears your head, but my mind was a fog of strategy and anxiety. I was pushing the stroller, adjusting AJ's blanket to shield him from the draft, when a shadow fell over us near the glass entrance doors. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. The scent announced her before she even spoke. It wasn't just perfume, it was an aggressive cloud of vanilla and expensive, cloying musk that seemed to stick to the back of your throat. It was the scent of a woman who tries too hard to be noticed. "Mrs. Sterling," a voice chimed. It was sickeningly sweet, like syrup masking the taste of arsenic. I straightened up, my hand instinctively moving to lock the wheels of the stroller. I turned slowly, composing my face into a mask of indifference. Tiffany Banks stood there. In person, standing right in front of me, she was even more striking than in the photos, and more infuriating. She was petite, blonde, with the kind of innocent, doe-eyed face that makes men want to build castles to protect her. She was wearing a white sundress that cost more than my first car and oversized sunglasses, looking like a movie star on her day off. But I saw her hands. They were clenched into fists at her sides, knuckles white, betraying the rage boiling under that perfect facade. She wasn't here to apologize. She was here to hunt. "Miss Banks," I said, my voice cool, betraying none of the thumping in my chest. "I'm surprised you have time to stalk me. Shouldn't you be visiting Rick at the base?" "Oh, wait. You can't. He's under arrest, isn't he? I hear the bachelor quarters are quite cramped." Tiffany whipped off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but not from sorrow. They burned with a manic, desperate intensity. She took a step closer, invading my personal space, ignoring the doorman who was watching from the desk. "Don't act so high and mighty, Maggie," she spat, dropping the sweet act instantly. Her voice was a low hiss. "You think because you have the baby, you've won? You think a piece of paper and a brat makes you a wife? Rick is miserable. He calls me every chance he gets. He told me everything." I raised an eyebrow, crossing my arms to create a barrier between us. "Oh. And what did my husband tell you, exactly?" "He told me you're like a log in bed," she sneered, her lip curling in disgust. "He said being with you is suffocating. He said you're too perfect, too stiff, always analyzing him with your psychology degree. He needs someone who understands him. Someone real. Someone who makes him feel like a man, not a project." It was a classic Mistress script. Devalue the wife. Elevate the affair. I had treated dozens of women who had heard these exact words. It was textbook projection and insecurity. But knowing the theory didn't stop the words from stinging. It felt like a physical slap. However, I wasn't the same woman I was a week ago. The Maggie who cried over herbal tea was gone. "Is that so?" I asked, stepping forward, forcing her to take a stumbling step back. "If I'm such a log, Tiffany, why did he spend 3 years trying to have a child with me? Why is this baby a sterling heir, and you're just the entertainment?" Tiffany's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "He loves me. We were going to get married. If things had gone according to plan." "What plan?" I cut in sharply, my eyes locking onto hers. She hesitated, realizing she was slipping. "The plan for us to be together. He promised he would leave you after the baby was born." "He promised a lot of things, Tiffany," I said, lowering my voice so the doorman wouldn't hear, but making sure every word landed like a punch to the gut. "But let me tell you something I know. I did a little digging after I saw your file. You were a nurse before you worked for your daddy, weren't you? At the fertility clinic downtown?" Tiffany froze. Her pupils dilated. "I know about the abortions, Tiffany," I lied. It was a calculated gamble based on a rumor my lawyer had dug up, but her reaction confirmed it instantly. 3 of them. Your uterus is damaged. Scar tissue. The doctors said you'd likely never carry a child to term, didn't they?" Her face went pale, the rouge standing out starkly on her cheeks like clown makeup. "That's why you need Rick's money and his status," I pressed on, relentless. "Because you can't give the general a grandson. You can only give Rick a good time. And in the Sterling family, a barren mistress is just a liability. Once the fun wears off, you're disposable." "Shut up," she screeched, causing a woman walking her dog to stop and stare. "You don't know anything. You should have lost that baby. It wasn't supposed to be like this. You were supposed to be." She stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She didn't say, you should have divorced him. She didn't say, he should have left. She implies something far more sinister. She covered her mouth, realizing her mistake. The panic in her eyes was primal. It was the look of someone who had just confessed to a crime without saying the words. I looked at her, and suddenly, the suspicion I had harbored about the tea crystallized into a terrifying certainty. "What did you say?" I whispered, my voice trembling with rage. "I was supposed to be what? Dead?" Tiffany backed away, shaking her head frantically. "You're crazy. Stay away from Rick. Stay away from us." She turned and practically ran out of the lobby, her high heels clacking frantically on the marble floor. She looked like a cornered animal fleeing a predator. I watched her go, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. She had just confirmed it. This wasn't just about stealing a husband. They had tried to steal my son's life. I turned back to the stroller. AJ was sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the fact that his mother had just stared down a monster. I needed that tea. I needed it now. I couldn't wait any longer. Tiffany's slip of the tongue was the catalyst that burned away my remaining hesitation. I needed physical evidence, and I knew exactly where to find it. I called Joe, the driver, an hour later. I told him I had forgotten AJ's vaccination records and some specific baby formula at the Sterling mansion. I made my voice sound frantic, playing the part of the overwhelmed, hormonal new mother perfectly. Joe, bless his loyal heart, came immediately. As the black sedan pulled up to the familiar brick mansion in Fort Belvoir, a wave of nausea hit me. This place, once my home, now looked like a mausoleum. The ivy climbing the walls felt like chains. "I'll be quick, Joe," I said, leaving AJ in the car seat with the engine running and Joe watching him. "Just need to grab the documents from the study. Keep the AC on for him." I entered the house. It was silent. The air inside was stale, smelling of old wax and silence. Dory, the housekeeper, was likely in the laundry room in the basement at this hour. I moved quickly, my heels clicking softly on the hardwood. I didn't go to the study. I went straight to the kitchen. I scanned the counters. Clean. The cabinets. Organized. Rick was meticulous, he wouldn't leave the herbs lying around, especially now that he was under arrest at the barracks. He would have hidden them or destroyed them. Then I remembered his habit. Compost. Rick was obsessed with appearances, even down to being eco-friendly. He always insisted that organic waste, especially tea leaves and fruit peels, go into the compost bin in the backyard garden. He said it was good for his mother's prize-winning orchids. It was his chore. I slipped out the back door. The garden was wet from last night's rain. The smell of damp earth and decaying leaves filled the air. It was a smell I used to love, but now it smelled like a grave. I spotted the compost bin near the potting shed, hidden behind a trellis of roses. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it would wake the neighbors. If Constance came home early from her social club, or if Dory saw me digging in the trash, how would I explain this? "Just looking for poison, don't mind me?" I approached the bin. My hands were trembling. I lifted the lid. The smell was pungent, rotting vegetables, coffee grounds, and something sweeter, muskier. I held my breath and peered inside. There, near the top, mixed with eggshells and orange peels, was a clump of dark, fibrous material. It hadn't fully decomposed yet. It looked like wet tobacco, but with distinct reddish threads running through it. The tea dregs. I pulled a Ziploc bag from my purse. I didn't care about the slime. I didn't care about the dirt under my manicured nails. I reached in. The texture was slimy and cold. I scooped up a generous amount of the dregs, making sure to get the reddish threads. I sealed the bag, squeezing the air out. "Mrs. Sterling?" I jumped, nearly dropping the bag. I spun around, shoving the Ziploc behind my back, my heart slamming into my throat. Dory stood at the back door, holding a laundry basket full of Rick's shirts. Her face was confused, her brow furrowed. I thought I heard someone. What are you doing out here, honey? My mind raced. I forced a smile, though I felt like I might vomit. Oh, Dory! You startled me. I just wanted to see if the orchids survived the storm the other night. Dad, the general, loves them so much. I wanted to tell him they were okay. Dory's expression softened. She had always liked me better than Constance. You're a good soul, ma'am. Even after everything, you care about the flowers. The general will appreciate that. Just grabbing some papers for the baby, Dory. I'll be out of your hair in a minute. I hurried past her, back into the house, feeling the plastic bag burning against my palm. I ran upstairs to the master bathroom, our bathroom. I needed a control sample. I grabbed my hairbrush from the drawer, which I knew hadn't been cleaned since I went to the hospital. It was full of my hair strands. I pulled them out, long, dark strands that held the history of the last 6 months, and put them in a separate envelope. Then, for good measure, I grabbed the vaccination records from the nightstand to make my lie to Joe truthful. As I walked back to the car, clutching my purse to my chest, I felt like I was carrying a bomb. In a way, I was. This bag didn't contain explosives, but it contained enough truth to blow the Sterling family apart. Got everything, ma'am? Joe asked, looking at my flushed face. Yes, Joe, I said, exhaling a breath I felt I had been holding for 6 months. Let's go. Drive fast. I didn't trust the local labs. The Sterling influence ran too deep in Virginia. A name like mine on a toxicology request would raise flags, and a phone call would be made to the general or, worse, to Constance. If they found out what I was doing, they would bury this before I could even scream. I used a connection from my academic days. My father, the history professor, had an old friend whose daughter ran an independent toxicology lab in Boston. I overnight the samples under a pseudonym, Jane Doe, requesting a rush analysis for suspected herbal toxicity in a postpartum subject. The next 3 days were an agony of waiting. Time seemed to warp. Minutes dragged into hours. I tried to focus on AJ, feeding him, changing him, singing to him. But every time I looked at his innocent face, a cold terror gripped my heart. Had I poisoned him? Was he damaged because of my ignorance? Every time he cried, I panicked. Was he in pain? Was it the toxins? I barely slept. I paced the apartment floor at night, checking my email every 10 minutes. The glow of the laptop screen became my only companion in the dark. During the day, I had to keep up appearances. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was preparing the divorce papers. He wanted to push for a settlement based on infidelity. Maggie, he told me over the phone, his voice excited. We have the audio. That's leverage. We can get you good alimony. We can get the house. I don't want alimony, Henderson, I said, staring at the blank wall of my rental. I want justice. Just wait. I might have something else. Henderson sounded confused, but I didn't explain. I couldn't. Not until I was sure. If I was wrong, I was just a paranoid, hysterical ex-wife. If I was right, I was a witness to a crime. On the third night, my phone pinged. It was 11:42 p.m. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet apartment. Subject, analysis results reference case number 99281. I froze. The apartment was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. I sat down on the sofa, my legs suddenly too weak to support me. I opened the laptop. My finger hovered over the attachment. I was terrified of what I would find, but even more terrified of what it would mean if I found nothing. I clicked. The report opened. It was dense with chemical terms, graphs, and numbers. I scanned past the technical jargon, looking for the summary. Conclusion. Sample A, plant matter positive for high concentrations of Carthamus tinctorius, safflower, and Levisticum officinale, lovage. Sample B, hair follicle consistent with long-term, chronic ingestion of the compounds identified in Sample A over a period of approximately 4 to 6 months. Note, the combination and concentration of these alkaloids are consistent with traditional herbal abortifacients. Ingestion during the third trimester is strictly contraindicated due to high risk of severe uterine contraction, placental abruption, and postpartum hemorrhage. The air left the room. Postpartum hemorrhage. The doctor's words echoed in my mind from that night in the ER. We nearly lost her. Clotting factors were inexplicably low. I wasn't paranoid. I was right. My husband, the man I slept next to, the man who kissed my belly, he had been feeding me poison. Every cup of tea was a bullet he was firing at our unborn child. And Tiffany, she knew. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She meant I wasn't supposed to survive. Or the baby wasn't. Tears streamed down my face, hot and angry. I looked at the screen until the words blurred. This changed everything. This wasn't a divorce anymore. This was a crime scene. Tragedy has a way of clarifying things. I wiped my tears. I wasn't sad anymore. I was dangerous. I picked up my phone. I didn't call the police yet. I needed to destroy the root of the problem. I needed to show the general what his sterling bloodline had produced. My hand trembled as I printed the document. The reality of what I was holding was heavy enough to crush a soul. Rick didn't just cheat, he tried to erase us. Before I step into the lion's den to confront the general with this horrific truth, I need to know you're with me. If you are listening, please hit that like button and comment "Justice for AJ" below. Your support is the armor I need right now. Let's go take them down. I spent the rest of the night researching, turning my living room into a war room. I needed to understand the weapon before I fired back. I dove into medical journals and herbalist forums. Safflower. In small doses, it's used for circulation. In high doses, specifically in ancient Chinese medicine, it's used to dispel stasis and induce menstruation. For a pregnant woman, it's a death sentence for the fetus. Lovage. Another potent stimulant. Combined and brewed into a concentrated tea for 6 months? It wasn't an accident. It was a slow-acting poison designed to weaken the cervix, cause premature labor, and ensure that when the birth happened, the bleeding wouldn't stop. The plan became terrifyingly clear in my mind. They didn't want a miscarriage in the early months. That would have been suspicious if I was healthy. They wanted a tragic accident near the end. If the baby died during a premature birth, Rick would get sympathy. If I died from hemorrhage, he would get everything. Everything. I pulled up the terms of our prenup and the Sterling family trust. It was complex, but the clause was clear. In the event of the wife's death, the custody of any heir and the management of their trust fund reverts to the father. And my own personal inheritance, my grandmother's money, the millions I had kept separate and intended for AJ's education? If I died without a will, and I didn't have one, believing I had decades to write it, it would go to my next of kin. My husband. It wasn't just about love. It wasn't just about Tiffany wanting to be Mrs. Sterling. It was about money. Cold, hard cash. I remembered reading about Tiffany's father's construction company in the business section a few weeks ago. Vance Construction facing bankruptcy. Federal contracts under review. Rick had debts too, gambling debts I had vaguely suspected but ignored because I wanted to believe in him. They were going to kill me and my son to fund their lifestyle. They were going to wash my blood off their hands with my own money. The horror of it was so vast it felt numb. I looked at the clock. 6 a.m. The sun was rising over DC, painting the sky in blood orange. I showered. I scrubbed my skin until it was red, trying to wash away the memory of his touch. I dressed in a sharp black suit. I put on makeup to hide the dark circles. I wasn't going to look like a victim today. I looked like an executioner. I texted General Sterling's personal aide, a man named Colonel Vance, no relation to Tiffany, thankfully. I need to see the general. Alone. Neutral ground. The tea house in Georgetown. 10 a.m. Tell him it concerns the immediate survival of the Sterling reputation. Do not tell Rick. Do not tell Constance. The reply came 2 minutes later. Confirmed. I packed the lab report, the printouts of the texts, the photo Tiffany sent, and the audio recording on a USB drive. I put them in a clear plastic folder. I kissed AJ on the forehead. My mother had flown in from Boston the night before to help, and she was watching him. She saw the look on my face. "Where are you going, Maggie?" she asked, seeing my suit and the folder. "You look intense." "I'm going to end this, Mom," I said, checking my reflection one last time. "Don't open the door for anyone. Not even if the Pope knocks." I drove to Georgetown. The traffic was heavy, but I felt strangely calm. It was the calm of the eye of the storm. The tea house was a quiet, dimly lit place favored by diplomats and politicians who wanted to talk off the record. It smelled of sandalwood and secrets. General Arthur Sterling was already there. He sat in a corner booth, his back to the wall, eyes scanning the room. He wore a gray civilian suit, but he still looked like he was wearing armor. He looked tired. The scandal of the slap at the hospital had started to whisper through the ranks. He looked like a man trying to hold back a flood with his bare hands. I sat down opposite him. I didn't order tea. I couldn't look at tea right now without feeling sick. "Margaret," he said, his voice grave. "You look well." "Better than I expected." "Appearances can be deceiving, General," I said, placing my hands on the table. "We both know that. You asked for this meeting. You mentioned the family reputation. If this is about the divorce settlement, I told you, I will handle Rick. You will be taken care of. You don't need to threaten me." "This isn't about divorce, Dad," I said, sliding the plastic folder across the polished wooden table. "And it's not about money. It's about why your grandson almost died. And why your son isn't just an adulterer, he's a monster." Arthur frowned, his thick eyebrows knitting together. He looked at the folder, then at me. He saw the cold fire in my eyes, and for the first time, the 4-star general looked uneasy. "Read it," I commanded. "Start with the lab report." Arthur Sterling opened the folder. His hands, large and calloused from years of service, moved slowly. He put on his reading glasses. He read the first page. Then the second. I watched his face. I watched the color drain from his cheeks, leaving them a sickly gray. I watched his jaw unclench, his mouth opening slightly in disbelief. His eyes darted back and forth across the lines of the toxicology report, reading the words safflower, poisoning, homicide attempt. He stopped at the summary. His hand began to tremble. It started as a subtle vibration and grew until the paper rattled in his grip. He dropped the report on the table as if it burned him. He looked up at me, and the stoic mask was gone. In its place was naked horror. "This." His voice cracked. "This says he poisoned you?" "For 6 months," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was breaking for the man in front of me. "Every cup of tea." He watched me drink it. He smiled while he did it. He wanted me to bleed out on that table, Arthur. He wanted AJ born dead or damaged so he could collect the sympathy and the money. "No," Arthur whispered, shaking his head. He's weak. He's foolish. He's a cheater. But a murderer? His own child? He's not just foolish, I said, pointing to the next document in the folder, the financial records I had pulled, showing the transfers to Tiffany Banks and the debts. He's desperate. And he's being controlled. Tiffany Banks is a former nurse. She provided the recipe. Rick provided the access. Arthur looked at the financial papers. He saw the transfers. He saw the connection to Vance Construction. And then, he closed his eyes. A tear, a single, heavy tear, leaked out and rolled down the deep groove of his cheek. It was shocking to witness. Generals don't cry. They send men to die, they sign orders, they stand tall. But fathers? Fathers cry when their world ends. I investigated too, he murmured, his voice sounding hollow, as if coming from a deep well. I had my intelligence unit look into his accounts after the incident at the hospital. I found irregularities. Missing inventory. Fuel siphoning from the depot. Old equipment sold as scrap to a private contractor. Vance Construction, I finished for him. He nodded, looking defeated. Yes. He was stealing from the army. I thought that was the worst of it. I thought he was a thief and a cheater. I was preparing to court-martial him for that. I thought I could handle that internally. He looked back at the toxicology report, staring at the chemical names like they were demons. But this is evil. Pure evil. This isn't just greed. This is malice. He slumped back in the booth. He looked 10 years older than he had 10 minutes ago. The pride, the arrogance of the Sterling lineage, it all crumbled into dust right there in that tea house. I failed, Arthur whispered. I raised a monster. I pushed him too hard, or not enough. I don't know. You didn't hold the cup, Arthur, I said softly. He did. He made his choice. Arthur took a deep breath. He took off his glasses and wiped them with a handkerchief, composing himself. When he put them back on, the grief was hidden behind a wall of steel. The general was back. The father was packed away. Margaret, he said, his voice firm again, though icy. You have given me the evidence. What do you want? I want him gone, I said. I don't just want a divorce. I want him in prison. I want him to never see AJ again. And I want Tiffany Banks to rot in a cell next to him. If we go to civilian police, this becomes a circus, Arthur said, his mind tactical again. The press will eat us alive. The investigation will take months. I don't care about the press, I countered. But I know you do. I handle my own, Arthur said. He leaned forward. If you hand this over to me, I promise you, the justice he faces under the Uniform Code of Military Justice will be far swifter and far more severe than anything a civilian court can dish out. We have laws against conduct unbecoming and attempted murder? That can carry a life sentence. No bail. No fancy lawyers getting him off on a technicality. I looked at him. I saw the pain in his eyes, but I also saw the resolve. He was offering to be the executioner of his own son. Can you do it? I asked. Can you destroy your own son? Arthur stood up. He picked up the folder. He ceased to be my son the moment he tried to kill my grandson, Arthur said. Go home, Maggie. Lock your doors. Tomorrow, you will see justice. The next morning, the trap was set. I wasn't there, but Arthur's aide later filled me in on the details with grim satisfaction. I can picture it perfectly. Rick was still under house arrest in the Bachelor Officer Quarters, BOQ. He was pacing his room, terrified but also hopeful. In his delusional mind, he thought the storm had passed. He thought the slap was the punishment. He thought his father would cover it up to protect the family name, just like Constance always did. He probably thought he'd get a demotion, maybe a transfer to a quiet base in Germany for a few years until the heat died down. At 0900 hours, a summons came. Lieutenant Colonel Sterling, the general will see you in his office. Rick shaved. He put on his fresh dress uniform. He polished his boots until they shone. He thought this was the rehabilitation talk. He walked across the base, head high, ignoring the stares of the enlisted men who had heard the rumors. When he arrived at the headquarters building, he was ushered straight into the general's main office. The room was vast, lined with flags and commendations. General Arthur Sterling sat behind his massive mahogany desk. But he wasn't alone. Standing in the shadows of the room were two large men in MP armbands. And sitting on the couch was a JAG, Judge Advocate General, prosecutor. Rick faltered as he entered. Dad? Who are these men? Arthur didn't look up from the file he was reading. It was my plastic folder. Stand at attention, Lieutenant Colonel, Arthur barked. Rick snapped his heels together instinctively. Sir. Arthur stood up. He walked around the desk, holding the toxicology report. I have here a report, Arthur began, his voice deceptively calm. From an independent lab in Boston. It analyzes samples taken from your wife's hair and the compost bin in your garden. Rick's face went slack. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a ghost. His eyes darted to the door, realizing too late that there was no exit. It details a systematic poisoning using Carthamus tinctorius, Arthur continued, stepping closer. Tell me, Richard. Where did you learn herbal medicine? Was it at West Point? Or was it from your whore? Rick started to sweat. Dad, I don't know what that is. It was just tea. It was supposed to help her. You know Mom is into holistic stuff. Liar. Arthur threw the papers in his face. The sheets scattered over the floor like confetti. It was poison. You tried to induce a hemorrhage. You tried to murder the mother of your child. It wasn't me. Rick screamed, his composure shattering. It was Tiffany. She told me it would just make her weak. She said it would just induce labor early so I could leave. She promised it wouldn't kill her. She said Maggie was strong. The confession hung in the air. He admitted it. He admitted he knew. He just argued about the intent of the damage. Arthur looked at him with pure disgust. You just confessed to conspiracy to commit assault and endangering a life. And that's on top of the embezzlement charges from the supply depot. Embezzlement? Rick squeaked. Did you think I wouldn't find out about the fuel? Or the spare parts sold to Vance Construction? Arthur shook his head. You are a disgrace to the uniform. You are a disgrace to humanity. Arthur turned his back on him. He nodded to the MPs. Arrest him. Charges include attempted murder, conspiracy, larceny, and conduct unbecoming an officer. Dad. No. Please. Rick fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face, snot running from his nose. Don't do this. I'm your son. Mom won't let you do this. Call Mom. Your mother isn't here, Arthur said, staring out the window at the flag waving in the wind. And I don't have a son. The MPs grabbed Rick by the arms. He struggled, screaming and crying like a toddler. They dragged him out of the office, his boots scraping uselessly against the floor. As the door closed on his screams, Arthur Sterling remained standing by the window. He didn't move for a long time. The general had won the battle for justice, but the father had lost everything. With Rick in custody and singing like a canary to save his own skin, the MP investigators had everything they needed to go after the mastermind. Jurisdiction was tricky. Tiffany was a civilian. But because the crime involved a military officer and theft of government property, the embezzlement conspiracy, the FBI was brought in to coordinate with the military police. I insisted on being there. Technically, I wasn't allowed. But General Sterling made a call. I was the victim, and I was the key witness. I sat in an unmarked car across the street from Tiffany's apartment building in downtown D.C. It was 2 p.m. Tiffany Banks was in her penthouse. According to the wiretap they had rushed through, she had booked a one-way ticket to Cabo San Lucas leaving that evening. She was running. I watched as the tactical team moved in. They didn't knock. The front door of the building burst open. Men in windbreakers marked FBI and NCIS swarmed the lobby. Up on the 12th floor, the scene was chaotic. Later, an agent told me what happened. Tiffany was frantically packing. She had a suitcase open on the bed. She was stuffing it with cash, money Rick had stolen and given to her, and jewelry. She was throwing clothes in haphazardly, her composure gone. When the battering ram hit her door, she screamed. I listened to the police radio in the car. Target secured. Subject is resisting. A few minutes later, they brought her out. It was a sight I will cherish forever. Tiffany Banks, the woman who had sneered at me in the lobby days ago, the woman who had called me a log, was in handcuffs. She wasn't wearing her designer dress. She was wearing sweatpants and a tank top. Her hair was messy. She was crying, her mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. As they led her to the patrol car, she looked up and saw me. I had stepped out of the unmarked car. I stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, just watching. Our eyes met. She stopped struggling. The realization hit her. I hadn't just divorced Rick. I had destroyed them. You, she screamed, lunging toward me, but the agent held her back easily. You bitch. You ruined everything. It's your fault. If you had just died. Get her out of here, the agent said, shoving her into the back of the car. As the siren's wail faded, I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was Constance Sterling calling. She had heard. The news was out. I answered the phone. You ungrateful little. Constance shrieked on the other end. What have you done? You arrested my son. You destroyed this family. I saved your grandson, Constance, I said calmly. Your son tried to kill us. Lies. It's that whore's fault. Rick is innocent. She was hysterical, delusional. I'm coming over there. I'm going to take that baby. You are unfit. You are a traitor. Come if you want, I said. But the FBI is still here. Maybe they want to ask you how much you knew about Rick's spending habits. Or maybe the general would like to know how you raised a son who steals from the army. There was silence on the other end. Then, the sound of a phone being smashed. I hung up. My lawyer, Henderson, called next. Maggie, he said, sounding excited. I just heard. They got them both. Rick is trying to cut a deal. He's blaming everything on her. She's blaming everything on him. It's a bloodbath. Good, I said. Let them tear each other apart. There's going to be a trial, Henderson warned. A court-martial for him, federal court for her. You'll have to testify. It's going to be ugly. They'll try to drag your name through the mud. I don't care, I said, looking up at the clear blue sky. I've walked through fire, Henderson. A little mud won't hurt me. I got back in the car. Take me to my son, Joe. The court-martial of Lieutenant Colonel Richard Sterling was the biggest scandal to hit the military community in decades. It was held in a secure courtroom at the Washington Navy Yard. The press was barred from the room, but the gallery was packed with high-ranking officers and their wives. I sat in the front row. I wore white. It was a psychological choice, the color of innocence, the color of truth. Rick sat at the defense table. He looked gaunt. His uniform was stripped of its insignia. He looked small. When I took the stand, the defense attorney, a slimy man hired by Constance before she was committed to a clinic for her breakdown, tried to attack my character. "Mrs. Sterling, isn't it true that you were suffering from postpartum depression? That you imagined these plots?" "I didn't imagine the lab report," I said calmly into the microphone. "I didn't imagine the audio recording of my husband with his mistress while I was in labor. And I certainly didn't imagine the bruises on my body from the poison." The prosecutor played the audio tape. The one from the night of the birth. Hearing it again, in that solemn room, was excruciating. The moans. The "Tiffany, you devil." The room was dead silent. I saw generals shifting uncomfortably. I saw wives glaring at Rick with pure hatred. Then came the testimonies of the accused. It was pathetic. Rick took the stand and sobbed. "I was manipulated," he cried, looking at the jury. "She told me she was pregnant. She threatened to go to my father. She gave me the herbs. I didn't want to kill Maggie, I just wanted a way out. I just wanted a divorce." Then Tiffany's deposition was read, since she was being tried separately in federal court, but her statement was evidence. She painted Rick as a controlling monster who forced her to procure the drugs. He said if I didn't help him get rid of the wife, he'd kill me too. They were cannibals, eating each other to survive. Before I stepped down, I asked the judge for permission to ask the defendant one question. It was unorthodox, but the judge, a father himself, nodded. I turned to Rick. He couldn't meet my eyes. "Rick," I said. He looked up, tears in his eyes. "During those 6 months," I asked, my voice trembling slightly, "when you brewed that tea, when you handed me that cup, did you ever, for 1 second, think about the baby? Did you ever think that was your son?" Rick opened his mouth. He looked at me. He looked at his father in the back of the room. He closed his mouth. He looked down. He couldn't say yes. Because a yes would make him a monster who killed his child knowingly. And a no would make him a monster who didn't care. His silence was the loudest sound in the room. Finally, the panel of judges returned. The presiding judge, a stern major general, read the verdict. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Sterling. On the charge of conduct unbecoming an officer, guilty. On the charge of larceny and wrongful appropriation, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit aggravated assault, guilty. Rick closed his eyes. "You are hereby sentenced to dismissal from the service, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and confinement for a period of 12 years. 12 years. Rick slumped forward, his head hitting the table. As the MPs came to shackle him, he looked back at the gallery. He looked for his mother. But Constance wasn't there. He looked for his father. General Arthur Sterling sat in the back row, his face like stone. He didn't meet his son's eyes. He stood up and walked out before they even put the cuffs on. Then Rick looked at me. I stood up. I looked him in the eye. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at him with indifference. He was a stranger to me now. A ghost. I turned and walked out of the courtroom. The sun outside was blinding. It was over. 6 months passed. I had moved to Boston with AJ. I wanted to be closer to my parents and far away from the whispers of DC. I used the settlement money, which Arthur insisted I take from Rick's frozen assets, to buy a nice brownstone. I had started a small private practice, specializing in trauma therapy for women. Life was quiet. Life was good. Then, a letter arrived. The envelope had the stamp of the Leavenworth Disciplinary Barracks. I debated throwing it away. I held it over the trash can for a long minute. My mother watched me from the kitchen. "You don't have to read it, Maggie," she said. "I know," I replied. "But I need to know if he's still blaming everyone else." I opened it. Rick's handwriting was shaky, different from the confident script I used to know. "Maggie, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. I have a lot of time to think in here. I think about AJ. I hope he looks like you. I'm writing because there is one truth I never told you. One truth that might explain, though not excuse, why I was so desperate for approval, why I was so weak. I am not Arthur Sterling's son." I stopped reading. I blinked, rereading the line. My mother had an affair before she married Dad. A flight instructor. She was pregnant when she met Arthur. Arthur knew. He couldn't have children, a war injury from Vietnam. They made a deal. He needed an heir, she needed a husband. So they raised me as a Sterling. But I always knew something was wrong. Dad was always cold to me. He looked at me like I was a project, not a son. Mom compensated by spoiling me, by giving me everything I wanted to hide her guilt. I grew up feeling like a fraud. I felt like I had to be perfect to earn my place, but I never had the talent or the discipline. So I cheated. I took shortcuts. With money, with women, with life. When Tiffany offered me a way out, a way to be happy without the pressure, I took it. I was a coward. I wanted to destroy the Sterling legacy because I felt crushed by it. "I'm sorry, Maggie. Tell AJ his father died in the war. It's better that way. Rick." I put the letter down on the kitchen counter. I looked out the window at the autumn leaves falling in the park across the street. It made sense. The coldness of the general. The neurotic overprotectiveness of Constance. The deep-seated insecurity that drove Rick to be a narcissist. It was a tragedy of lies built upon lies. A house of cards that had finally collapsed, crushing everyone inside. I felt a strange sense of pity. Not forgiveness, no. But pity. Rick was a victim of a lie long before he became a villain. He was a monster, yes, but he was a monster made, not born. I took a lighter from the drawer. I went to the sink. I lit the corner of the letter and watched it burn. The paper curled into black ash, taking the Sterling secrets with it. "Goodbye, Rick," I whispered. A week later, I did something I didn't have to do. I flew back to Virginia. I went to the assisted living facility where Constance Sterling was staying. It was a high-end place, looking more like a resort than a hospital. Arthur paid for it, even though he never visited. I found her in the garden. She was sitting on a stone bench, staring at a rosebush. She looked frail. The Chanel suits were gone, replaced by a soft cardigan. Her hair was gray, she had stopped dyeing it. I approached her. "Constance?" She looked up. Her eyes were cloudy. "Dementia," the doctors said. Accelerated by the shock of the trial and the public humiliation. The collapse of her carefully constructed world had broken her mind. She stared at me for a long time. Then, a smile spread across her face. "Tiffany," she whispered. "Is that you? Did you bring the tea?" I froze. Even in her madness, she remembered the tea. She knew. She had always known. "No, Constance," I said softly. "It's Maggie." Her smile faded. She looked confused. Maggie? Rick's Maggie? No, she's gone. Rick said she went away. She grabbed my hand suddenly, her grip surprisingly strong. You have to tell Arthur not to be mad. Tell him Rick is a good boy. He's his boy. We promised. He promised not to tell. It was our secret. She was reliving her lie. The burden of 40 years of deception. It's okay, Constance, I said, gently pulling my hand away. Arthur knows. It's over. She started to weep, soft, broken sobs. I just wanted to be safe. I just wanted a family. I didn't want to be alone. I looked at this broken woman. She had orchestrated so much pain just to maintain an illusion of perfection. She had threatened to destroy me. She had hated me because I was real and her life was fake. And now, she was a prisoner of her own fading mind. I didn't feel the need to yell at her. Fate had already punished her more than I ever could. I stood up. I placed a hand on her shoulder for a brief second. A gesture of mercy, not affection. Goodbye, Constance. I walked away. I left the sterling ghosts behind me in that garden. I had a plane to catch. I had a son waiting for me. Another year passed. AJ was 2 years old now. He was walking, talking, and possessed a stubborn streak that was undeniably sterling, regardless of biology. One afternoon, there was a knock on my door in Boston. I opened it to find Arthur Sterling standing there. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a grandfatherly sweater and slacks. He held a wrapped gift in his hands. He had retired 6 months ago. The 4 stars were gone. He was just Arthur now. He looked smaller, softer. Maggie, he said, looking humble. Can I see him? I hesitated. This was the man who had slapped his son for me. The man who had put justice above family. The man who had sent his own son to prison. Come in, Arthur, I said, stepping aside. AJ was playing with blocks on the rug. He looked up. Grandpa! I had shown him photos. Arthur dropped the gift, a toy airplane, and knelt on the floor. His eyes filled with tears. He knew AJ wasn't his biological grandson. He knew the bloodline ended with him. But when AJ ran over and hugged him, Arthur hugged back fiercely. Hey, buddy, Arthur choked out. Look at you. You're big. I went to the kitchen to make coffee. I watched them from the doorway. Biology is strange, but love is stranger. Rick wasn't Arthur's son by blood, but Arthur had raised him. And AJ. AJ was the only innocence left in this mess. Arthur stayed for dinner. We didn't talk about Rick. We didn't talk about Constance. We talked about AJ's preschool. We talked about the Red Sox. When he left, he handed me an envelope. I set up a trust, he said. For AJ. It's everything. The house, the savings. When I go, it's all his. Arthur, you don't have to, I said. He's not. He is a sterling, Arthur interrupted firmly. He is the best of us. Because he has you. And because I choose him. Family isn't blood, Maggie. I learned that the hard way. Family is loyalty. He kissed my cheek. You saved us, Maggie. You saved the honor of this family by destroying the rot. Thank you. He walked down the hallway to the elevator, a lonely old man, but a man at peace. The snow is falling in Boston today. It covers the city in a blanket of white, clean and fresh. I am sitting in my office. I have a client coming in 10 minutes, a young woman who thinks she's crazy because her husband is gaslighting her. I'm going to help her. I'm going to show her the exit. My phone buzzes. It's a text from Dr. Eris, a pediatrician I met a few months ago. He's kind. He's handsome. He asked me out for dinner tonight. Still on for 7? I look at the phone. I smile. I type back, make it 7:30. I have to read a bedtime story to a very important little man first. I'm not rushing into anything. I learned my lesson. I don't need a man to complete me. I don't need a savior. I saved myself. I pick up the framed photo on my desk. It's me and AJ on the beach last summer. We are laughing. We are free. The storm that hit Arlington 3 years ago destroyed my house, but it built my home. It washed away the lies and left the truth standing. My water broke in the middle of a nightmare. But I walked out of it into a dream I built with my own 2 hands. And if you're listening to this, and you feel trapped in a storm of your own, remember, you are stronger than you think. You can record the call. You can find the evidence. You can walk away. And you can win. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to relive, but I hope it gives you strength. If you enjoyed this journey of justice and survival, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share it with a woman who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my shoes? Until next time, stay strong. And so, this story reminds us of the profound strength that lies within the human spirit. It serves as a powerful testament to resilience, the courage to face betrayal, and the determination to rebuild from the ashes of despair. Life's storms may shatter illusions, but they also reveal truths about ourselves, our worth, and the boundaries we must set to protect what truly matters. Through her journey, Maggie showed us that self-worth is non-negotiable and that no betrayal, no matter how deep, can define who we are. She taught us the importance of standing up for justice, not just for ourselves but for the innocent lives that depend on us. Her story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to reclaim our lives, rewrite our narratives, and create a future built on truth and strength. What about you? What lessons do you take from Maggie's story? Share your thoughts below, or simply comment good if this reflection resonated with you. Let's keep inspiring each other to be stronger, braver, and more resilient every day.